Okay, which one of you weirdos left a baby rattle in my dog's mouth? That was the first thing I said aloud when I walked into the living room that morning. I was talking to no one, really, unless you counted Tank, my 12-year-old yellow lab, who was lying on the rug with his tail thumping slowly against the floor and that strange little plastic rattle between his paws. It was one of those classic baby toys, light blue with a white handle and pastel stars, the kind you'd see in a magazine ad for diapers. Except there were no babies in this house, never had been. I picked up the rattle slowly, half expecting it to squeak or buzz, but it didn't. Just a soft rattle of little beads inside. It was clean. Like fresh out of the package clean. I checked Tank's mouth. No blood, no cuts, no sign he'd chewed it off a stuffed animal or anything like that. "Where did you get this?" I asked him. He blinked up at me with those calm, cloudy eyes of his and rolled over for a belly rub. I scratched his belly absent-mindedly while my mind reeled. It was just me and Tank living in this house in the hills of Vermont, about 20 minutes outside Brattleboro. We had neighbors, sure, but not many. The house on one side had been empty for a year now, and the couple on the other side were snowbirds down in Florida until the spring. The rest was forest and trails. Tank got up after a bit, stretching in that slow, lazy way he always did, and padded over to the back door. He sat, gave me a look, and wagged his tail. "You want to go out again? You were just out an hour ago?" He barked once, just once, not loud, but firm. That meant something. I opened the door and let him out into the fenced backyard, watching as he trotted across the frosty grass to the gate at the edge of the yard. He sat down there and looked back at me. "You want to go for a walk?" He barked again. So I got my coat and boots, leashed him up, and we started down the trail behind the house. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the cold air makes your breath puff out in clouds. Tank seemed oddly focused, his nose low, sniffing with intent, tail high. After about 15 minutes, he veered off the main path and pulled me toward a small clearing. That's where I saw it. A torn baby blanket, just lying there at the base of a tree, folded weirdly like someone had tried to make a bed out of it. Next to it was a single baby sock, pale yellow with a little duck embroidered on the cuff. I looked around. Nothing else. No people, no stroller tracks, no footprints in the frost. "Tank, what the hell is going on?" He sniffed at the blanket, then looked up at me, whined, and pawed the ground next to it. Something was off. I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures, then carefully gathered the blanket and sock into a plastic bag from my pocket. I didn't touch them directly. Then we walked home in silence. I didn't let Tank off the leash this time. Back at the house, I placed the bag on the kitchen table and stared at it while the coffee brewed. A million thoughts swirled in my head, none of them comforting. Was someone squatting in the woods? Had a family broken down nearby and tried to spend the night? Why was there a baby rattle in my house? After breakfast, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the old desktop in the corner and pulled up the security system app. I'd installed a few motion sensor cameras a couple of years ago when bears were knocking over trash cans. I rarely checked them unless something got knocked down. I scrolled through the past 24 hours of footage, fast-forwarding through hours of stillness. Then, at around 2:17 a.m., the camera by the side fence triggered. My heart thudded. There, barely in the frame, was Tank. Standing by the gate, and beyond the fence, something moved. A small shape. I leaned in. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a child. No, smaller. A toddler? Maybe a little over a year old, wearing only a thin onesie. The footage was grainy, but I could see the child toddling unsteadily up to the gate. Tank stood motionless, then nudged his head through the bars. The kid reached out with a tiny hand, holding the baby Rattle. I paused it there. My skin prickled all over. How had a toddler ended up outside my property line in the middle of the night? Where were the parents? I rewound and fast-forwarded. The footage lasted less than 2 minutes. The kid handed the Rattle to Tank, then turned around and waddled back toward the woods. Tank watched him go, then nudged the Rattle through the bars and lay down. I scrolled forward. Nothing else. No other motion. No adult figures. I stood there for a long while, staring at the screen, heart racing. This wasn't just a fluke. Tank didn't just find that Rattle. Someone, or something, had given it to him. I called the local sheriff. Sheriff Donnelly arrived within 20 minutes. He was a heavy-set man with a kind face and tired eyes. He took one look at the footage and asked if I could show him the clearing. I agreed. Tank led the way, ears perked up like he knew exactly what we were looking for. When we got to the spot, the blanket and sock were gone. The ground had been disturbed, dirt kicked up, a few small boot prints barely visible in the soil. Donnelly crouched down and took a long breath. Looks like someone was here, all right. Could be they came back and took whatever they left. Might have seen your dog sniffing around and got spooked. Why leave the Rattle behind? He stood and dusted off his knees. That's the strangest part. You're sure you don't know anyone who might have dropped by? I live alone. My folks passed. No siblings, no nieces or nephews. Just me and Tank. He nodded. All right. I'll have a deputy check the missing persons reports. You mind if we install a couple more cameras on your property? Go ahead. I want to know if that kid comes back. Tank didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he seemed energized, like something important was happening. He stuck to me like glue the rest of the day, except every now and then he'd wander over to the gate and stare into the woods. By the time night rolled around, I barely slept. I had the app open on my phone all night, watching the cameras in case anything moved. Nothing did. But the next morning, something was waiting by the gate, a pacifier. Pale green, placed neatly on the ground just outside the bars. Tank sat beside it, tail wagging. And I realized something I hadn't considered before. He wasn't just finding these things. Someone was giving them to him. And that someone, or something, wanted us to notice. The pacifier was clean. That was the first thing I noticed when I crouched down near the gate. Not a smudge of dirt, not a pine needle stuck to it. It didn't look like it had been on the forest floor for more than a minute. And yet, somehow, it had appeared overnight. Tank sniffed it gently, tail still wagging like we'd just received a gift. I leaned forward, careful not to touch it with my bare hands, and used a plastic bag to pick it up. I checked the security footage again inside. Sure enough, around 3:11 a.m., the camera by the back gate clicked on. The child appeared again, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, small and slow-moving, like he was trying not to make a sound. He toddled right up to the bars and knelt down to place the pacifier, then backed away. No adults. No voices. Just the faint sound of leaves rustling. My stomach twisted. Who would let a baby wander the woods in the middle of the night? It didn't make sense. This couldn't be a normal situation. I called Sheriff Donnelly again. He came by with Deputy Finch, a younger guy with a sharp jaw and cautious eyes. Both of them watched the footage without saying a word. Second night in a row, I said, pacing a little. You see it, right? This isn't Tank bringing things home. This is someone, or something, bringing them to him. Finch finally spoke. You sure this isn't a prank? A toddler prank? That's a new one. Donnelly rubbed his chin. Let's try something. Tonight we set up a trail camera right outside your fence. One with infrared. Maybe we'll catch more. You mind? I want to catch it. Or him. Or whatever it is. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in the living room with the lights off, Tank lying beside me on the rug. Every so often he'd lift his head and glance at the door, ears twitching. He didn't bark, just watched. Around 2:45 a.m., the camera on my phone buzzed. I clicked it open instantly, nothing but the faint shadows cast by moonlight. Then a figure appeared. Not the toddler this time. A man. My heart jumped into my throat. The figure stepped closer to the gate, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. He paused near the spot where the pacifier had been left, knelt down, and appeared to scan the yard. Even with the grainy footage, I could see he wasn't looking at the house. He was looking for Tank. He didn't open the gate. He didn't call out. He just crouched there, set something down, I couldn't tell what, and slipped back into the trees. I grabbed a flashlight and a coat and headed straight for the gate. Tank followed, silent but alert. There, in the same place, was a baby bottle, half full. The milk still looked fresh, no sign of spoilage or age. I scooped it into another bag and brought it inside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat with the lights on, watching Tank breathe calmly on his rug. By morning, Donnelly and Finch were back. The trail cam footage was clearer this time. The man wore a backpack, dark jeans, and what looked like running shoes. No facial features were visible. His hood stayed low. But he moved with a purpose. He's not stumbling, Donnelly said. He's not lost. He's watching. Waiting. Finch looked at me. Could this be someone you knew? Maybe an old friend? Someone you helped once? No one like that, I said. I've lived out here since 2012. Quiet life. Tank and I stick to ourselves. No drama. They left to canvass the trails. I stayed behind, restless. Tank stayed near the gate most of the afternoon, alert and calm. Almost like he was expecting something. I called my neighbor, Joe, the one who usually snowbirded down in Florida, just in case he'd left a trail camera or had some story to share. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Will, he said, his voice crackly with a weak connection. Everything all right up there? Sort of. You ever hear anything strange in the woods behind our houses? Strange how? Like coyotes? Like children, alone, at night. There was a pause. You remember that old hiker who went missing back in 2020? I do. They found his pack, but never him. Why? Just wondering if it's all connected somehow. I've been hearing things. Some neighbors think there's a camp back in the woods, but no one's seen it. Some hikers hear crying at night or see lights, but every time the rangers check it out, nothing. That made the hairs on my arms stand up. I thanked him and hung up. Later that evening, I made a decision. I put on my hiking boots, packed a flashlight, and clipped Tank's leash on. We were going into the woods. We followed the trail behind my house to the spot where we'd found the baby blanket. From there, I let Tank guide me. He sniffed with purpose, stopping every so often to glance back at me. After maybe half a mile, the woods got denser. The trees grew closer, shadows thicker. Then Tank stopped, whined, and looked left. There was a break in the brush, a faint path. I followed. It led us to a clearing I'd never seen before. And in the center of it was an old, collapsed shed. Or maybe an outpost cabin. Hard to tell. The roof had caved in, and most of it was covered in moss, but there were signs someone had been there recently. Footprints, small ones, and an empty formula container, fresh. Tank sniffed the air, then sat. I walked carefully around the structure. On one side was a blanket, spread out like someone had been sleeping there. A few baby toys, some snack wrappers. No people. But clearly someone had been using this as shelter. Recently. We headed back just before sunset. I told Donnelly everything. He sent a team to investigate the site, but by the time they got there, it had been cleared. No blanket, no toys, just the empty formula container I'd left behind. Someone was watching us. That night, Tank stayed near the door. I tried to pretend it was just a weird coincidence, maybe a runaway, maybe a young parent hiding in the woods. But when I woke up the next morning, I found a folded note under the mat by the gate. The handwriting was messy, almost childlike. "Please don't call the police. We're just trying to be safe. He likes your dog." My chest tightened. I looked around the yard, then back at the note. Tank came up beside me and rested his head on my knee. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to hurt us, but they were scared. And they trusted my dog. I decided to leave something by the gate that night. A small care package, baby wipes, a juice box, 2 granola bars, and a note that simply said, "Your secret's safe, but he shouldn't be in the cold. Let me help." I didn't sleep. I just watched the camera, watched Tank, watched the trees. No one came that night, or the next. But on the third night, something changed. The package was gone. And in its place was something that made my throat tighten. A drawing. Crayon on paper. A child's hand had scribbled it. A dog. Tank. With a stick figure boy hugging him. And above it, in big purple letters, it said, "Friend." Tank sat beside the drawing like it was a gift he'd been expecting. His tail thumped softly against the frosted porch wood, while I stood frozen with the paper in my hand, staring at the child's handwriting. The simplicity of it made something ache in my chest. It wasn't just a picture. It was a message. A thank you. A bridge. I brought it inside and laid it gently on the kitchen table. Tank followed, then curled up beneath the window, always within view of the backyard. He hadn't barked or growled through any of this, and that told me more than words could. He trusted whoever was out there. And Tank didn't give out his trust easily. I sat at the table with a mug of coffee growing cold between my hands. My mind spun with questions. Who was the child? Who was the man from the night footage? Why were they hiding in the woods with a baby? And why keep coming back? Sheriff Donnelly called later that morning. He said the rangers combed the area again. Still nothing. No signs of a camp, no evidence of long-term shelter. The ground had been disturbed, but not enough to track. He promised they'd try again with a canine unit the next day. I didn't mention the drawing. Not yet. I needed to think. That afternoon, I drove into Brattleboro and stopped at the general store. I bought some toddler snacks, a couple of small fleece blankets, baby formula, and a child's storybook. I didn't want to overwhelm, just show that someone out here cared. That evening, I packed everything into a small box and left it just outside the gate. On top, I placed a new note. "You're not alone. Let me help. The dog is waiting." Tank sat beside it until long after the sun dipped below the treetops. I sat inside by the window, watching him, sipping tea, trying not to let my mind spiral. Around midnight, he finally stood up, looked at the woods, and gave a soft chuff. Then he came back inside without complaint. By morning, the box was gone. Every item taken. This time, no note. No gift. Just silence. The next few days passed quietly. I kept checking the woods, kept checking the trail cams, but there was nothing. No movement, no shadows. Even Tank seemed unsure, his usual alertness replaced with quiet restlessness. He spent more time by the door, watching. Then, on the fourth night, it changed. Tank began to whine around 2 a.m. Not loud, just a soft, anxious sound from deep in his throat. I got up from the couch, grabbed my flashlight and coat, and stepped outside. The woods were dark and still, cold enough to bite through my sleeves. I didn't see anything at first, but Tank tugged gently toward the trees, ears up, body taut. We moved slowly, past the gate, down the worn trail, deeper into the woods. Then I heard it, a soft cry. Not animal, human. Tank sped up, leading me through a break in the trees I hadn't noticed before. And there, in a hollow between two ridges, I saw them. A man, crouched beside a child, wrapped in a too-thin blanket. He looked up as my flashlight beam swept across him, and I stopped where I stood. "Please," he said, voice rough, tired. "Don't call anyone." He wasn't threatening. He wasn't running, just crouching, protective, eyes wide. The toddler sat in his lap, clinging to his jacket. Tank moved forward slowly, tail wagging. He sat just feet away, looking at the child like he'd found an old friend. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said. "Tank brought me. He's been waiting." The man stared at me for a long moment, then slowly stood. The child clutched a corner of his jacket and blinked at me with wide eyes. "His name's Caleb," the man said. "I'm Josh." I nodded. "I'm Will. You guys hungry?" Josh hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. I reached into my coat and pulled out a granola bar, holding it out. He took it, unwrapped it carefully, and handed it to Caleb. The toddler bit into it hungrily. We didn't say anything for a while, just stood there in the cold, with Tank lying down between us, tail slowly sweeping the leaves. "Why out here?" I finally asked. Josh exhaled. "It's a long story. I didn't know where else to go. Caleb's mom left when he was 6 months old. We were living out of my car, then it broke down. The shelters were full. I didn't want to get the state involved. I didn't want to lose him." He looked down at the boy, gently brushing hair from his forehead. "You've been sleeping out here? In this weather?" "We find cabins, old sheds, tents people leave behind. I thought we could make it until spring. Then Tank found us. Caleb followed him one night, brought back that Rattle. Said the dog was nice, said he felt safe." My throat tightened. "You've been watching the house?" "Only to make sure he got back okay. I never meant any harm." I looked down at Tank, now nuzzling Caleb's hand gently. Caleb giggled and held on to the thick fur at his neck. "You can't stay out here," I said. "Not another night." Josh shook his head. "They'll take him. If I go to anyone official, I'm not talking about calling anyone. I'm talking about you two coming with me, just for the night. Food, warmth, a real bed, no questions, no strings." He hesitated, looked down at Caleb, then at Tank. "Just one night. Just one." We walked back together. Tank stayed close to Caleb, guiding him gently through the brush. When we reached the house, I brought out clean towels, a few spare clothes, and made a pallet on the living room floor near the fireplace. Josh sat on the couch, eyes flicking to every corner of the room like he couldn't believe it was real. I made soup. Caleb devoured his bowl with both hands. Tank stayed nearby the entire time, letting the boy lean against him like a big, furry pillow. Later that night, After Caleb had fallen asleep curled up beside Tank, Josh and I sat quietly with mugs of tea. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No, but I'm sure it's the right thing to do." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. I didn't push. I didn't ask anything more. I just let the quiet fill the space. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted. Not just for Josh, for all of us. Tank, curled up with a child who trusted him more than anyone else in the world, thumped his tail once and sighed in his sleep. Outside, the forest was silent. But in the house, for the first time in weeks, it felt like things were just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of soft laughter drifting in from the living room. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing. The woods, the baby Rattle, the late-night walk. But then I stepped out into the hallway and saw Caleb sitting cross-legged on the floor in one of my flannel shirts, holding Tank's face in his hands and talking to him like they were lifelong friends. Tank sat still, eyes half closed in bliss, tail swishing slowly behind him. Josh was sitting on the edge of the couch with a bowl of oatmeal in his lap, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks but didn't want to miss a second of what he was seeing. When he noticed me, he stood quickly. "Morning," I said, raising a hand. "Hope you like oatmeal. It's the only breakfast food I never run out of." He gave a tired smile. "It's perfect. Thank you. Thank you." "You're welcome. Caleb doing okay?" "Better than I've seen him in a long time. I think he feels safe here." I glanced at the boy, who had now laid his head on Tank's shoulder, mumbling something that made the dog let out a soft woof. "Tank's always had a good read on people." "Seems like it," Josh said. "He's the one who brought us here." We let the morning unfold slowly. I brought out some of the spare toys I'd bought during the last supply run, and Caleb lit up when I handed him a toy truck. He drove it back and forth on the hardwood floor while Tank lazily followed it with his eyes. Josh offered to help clean up after breakfast, and for a while, it felt almost like a normal morning. Like I'd always had a kid running around my house and a friend by the sink drying dishes. But the heaviness under it all never quite left. They were still in danger, still hiding. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching us, just beyond the trees. "You should stay a few more nights," I said as casually as I could once Caleb had gone down for a nap. "We've got snow coming. Heavy flurries for 2 days. You don't want to be stuck out there in that." Josh looked at me carefully. "I can't stay too long. I don't want to make trouble for you." "You're not. Look, if you stay quiet, don't bring attention. No one's going to know. You've got a roof, heat, food, and Caleb's safe. That's what matters, right?" He ran a hand through his hair. "You're right. I'm not used to help." "I get that, but sometimes help's not about charity. It's about community. And Tank? He already made the call." Josh gave a faint smile. "Yeah, I guess we're his project now." We settled into a rhythm over the next 2 days. The snow came, soft and steady at first, then harder by the second night. I shoveled the walk twice, but otherwise stayed in. I cooked extra portions. Josh helped with chores. Caleb followed Tank like a shadow, climbing over him, laying his head on the thick yellow fur whenever he felt sleepy. And Tank loved every second. On the third morning, I woke to find that someone had left another drawing on the porch. This time it wasn't from Caleb. The paper was larger, the lines neater. A crude but detailed sketch of the cabin where I'd first found Josh and Caleb. And drawn above it, a pair of angry eyes. Josh stood behind me as I stared down at it. "That's not from Caleb, is it?" "No, I don't think it is." Who else would— He didn't finish the sentence. We both turned at the same time and looked toward the woods. Someone else knew they were here. Someone who wasn't me. I brought the drawing inside, folded it carefully, and tucked it into a drawer. Then I checked the cameras. Nothing new. No alerts. No movement during the night. "We need to be careful," I said. Josh nodded, jaw tight. "I'll pack up. We'll leave tonight." "You shouldn't. Not in this storm, and not until we know who that came from. If someone's out there, they might be trying to scare you off. Or worse. I can't risk Caleb." "Then let's figure this out. Together." He hesitated, then nodded. That afternoon, I hiked the trail again, this time with Josh and Tank. We followed the same route back to the clearing and circled the old site. The snow had wiped away most traces, but behind one of the trees, Tank stopped cold. He growled. Low and deep. We both turned and saw it. A footprint. Large, fresh. Not ours. And beside it, ashes. Someone had built a fire there recently. Burned something. I stepped closer and saw what was left. Blackened scraps of clothing. Baby clothing. Josh stood frozen. "This isn't random," he said quietly. "Someone's trying to scare us." "Do you know anyone who'd want to find you?" "Not officially, but Caleb's grandfather. He tried to claim custody when Caleb's mom left. He has money, connections. I ran because I didn't trust he'd keep Caleb safe. He never liked me. He wanted Caleb as a trophy." "And you think he's looking for you?" "He has the means, and if he found out we were out here—" The rest didn't need to be said. We headed back fast. The wind was picking up, the sky turning heavy with gray. At home, I double-checked the locks and placed Tank's bed near the back door. That night, I barely slept. I took the first shift near the window, watching the snow swirl under the porch light. Tank lay quietly beside me, eyes open. Around 3 a.m., he stood. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Then he moved to the door. I flicked on the monitor. One of the cameras had picked up movement near the edge of the woods. A figure. Just standing there. Watching. Then slowly they walked forward, not toward the house, toward the fence. Tank let out one sharp bark. The figure froze. Then turned and vanished back into the trees. By morning, there were no new tracks. The snow had covered everything. But something had changed. Josh didn't say it aloud, but I knew what he was thinking. He couldn't run forever. Caleb deserved a life that wasn't built on fear. We stood by the window, watching Tank and Caleb play in the snow-covered yard. "He loves that dog," Josh said. "Tank loves him back. I don't know how we ended up here, but I'm glad we did." I nodded. "We're not done yet, but you're not alone anymore." Outside, Caleb laughed as Tank rolled in the snow, spraying up clouds of white that sparkled in the morning light. And for a moment, the fear faded. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The next few days passed in a strange kind of calm. The storm had blanketed the woods in thick, soft snow, and the bitter cold kept everyone indoors. I focused on keeping the fireplace going, restocking wood from the covered stack out back, and making sure we didn't run low on food. Josh offered to help, chopping logs with a steady rhythm while Caleb stayed curled up with Tank near the fireplace, flipping through picture books or mumbling stories to the dog that only he understood. I couldn't shake the image of the figure at the edge of the woods. Whoever it was hadn't returned, not visibly, but the sense of being watched lingered like frost on glass. The cameras stayed silent, but Tank remained vigilant. Every so often he'd lift his head sharply and stare out the window. Ears forward, tail still. It was always the same spot, just beyond the tree line. Josh tried not to let it show, but I could tell he was anxious. He double-checked the locks at night and slept lightly, rising at the faintest sound. He'd made it this far protecting Caleb alone. Trusting someone else to share that burden wasn't easy. One morning, just after the sun had climbed over the pines, I stepped outside to shovel the path again. That's when I saw the envelope. It was tucked into the wooden slats of the porch railing, half covered in frost, almost invisible. I picked it up carefully, heart beginning to race. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Give him up, Josh. You're not a father. You're a thief. This isn't over." No signature. No return address. Just the plain words in black ink, the handwriting neat and deliberate. I brought it inside and showed it to Josh. He stared at it for a long time, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Then he sat down, elbows on his knees, hands over his face. "It's him," he said finally. "It has to be." "The grandfather?" "He said I was unfit, that I was taking Caleb away from the life he deserved. I thought maybe if we disappeared, he'd stop. I didn't think he'd follow us out here. He knows you're here, which means you've got a choice. Keep hiding, or bring this into the light. If I go to court, he'll bury me in paperwork. I don't have anything. He has lawyers, influence. But you have the truth, and you've got Caleb. That has to count for something." Josh shook his head slowly. "Not always. Not to people who only care about bloodlines and reputations." I didn't argue. I just set the letter down and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we buy time. We keep you safe. We make a plan." That night I called an old friend in town, Jim Parker. He used to be a family lawyer before retiring early and moving up to Vermont. We'd gone fishing a few times over the years, shared a couple of holiday meals. He was one of the few people I trusted without question. Jim agreed to come by the next day. When he arrived, he took one look at Caleb playing in the living room, and Tank curled up beside him, and his expression softened. He listened carefully as Josh explained everything, how he'd been living with Caleb since his mother left, how the grandfather had tried to take custody, how they'd fled when it seemed like there was no other option. Jim didn't interrupt. He just took notes and nodded occasionally. "It's a mess," Josh said at the end. "I know that." "You've made mistakes," Jim replied, "but your heart was in the right place. I've seen a lot of custody fights. What the courts care about most is stability and safety. Right now you're giving Caleb both. That counts for more than you think. But if he finds out I'm here, he already knows. So the goal now is to build your case. Show you're not hiding anymore. You're stepping up. Will's house is a sanctuary, but it can't be permanent. So we need to work fast." Josh looked overwhelmed. I didn't blame him. After Jim left, we spent the afternoon putting together a timeline. Everything from Caleb's birth to his mother's departure, to the places they'd stayed since. Josh produced a crumpled folder from his backpack, filled with photos, medical forms, even scribbled notes from pediatric checkups. He'd kept it all, even on the run. Each piece added weight to the story. Not a runaway, not a drifter, a dad doing what he could with what he had. That evening, I gave Tank his dinner and rubbed his ears while he leaned against my leg. He was calm, steady, the eye in the storm. Caleb came toddling over in mismatched socks and plopped down beside us, hugging Tank like he was a favorite stuffed animal. "Doggie's my friend," Caleb said quietly. "He's your best friend," I told him, "and he brought you home." The next few days were filled with phone calls and documentation. Josh stayed busy organizing everything Jim needed. I made extra trips to town, restocking food, picking up essentials. Caleb began to settle into the rhythm of it. nap times, meal times, quiet mornings reading picture books in the sunlit corner of the living room. And still, Tank watched the woods. One morning, I found a smear of boot prints near the shed out back. Just a few steps in the snow, like someone had crept close and then turned away. No new letters, no new sightings. But the tension was building. It snapped 3 nights later. I was asleep on the couch when Tank barked. Loud. Urgent. I bolted upright. Josh ran out of the guest room a second later. Tank was already at the back door, growling. I flicked on the porch light. A man stood just beyond the fence, tall, silver-haired, wearing a long, dark coat. He didn't move, just stood there, watching. Josh stepped forward. "It's him." I moved quickly. "Stay here. Keep Caleb inside." I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on boots and a jacket, and headed out through the side gate. The cold sliced through my coat like glass. The man didn't move as I approached. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice level. "You're harboring a kidnapper," he said. His voice was low, smooth, "and I suggest you let him go before this becomes a federal issue. You're on private property, and I haven't seen any paperwork." He stepped forward. "You think hiding out in the woods makes him a father? He stole my grandson. He's protecting him from a man who didn't care until it was convenient." He sneered. "I'll have the court take him by force. You try to step foot in my house, and you'll find out real quick how protective a 12-year-old Labrador can be." He stared at me, face hard and cold. Then he turned and walked away without another word. I stood there until his shadow disappeared beyond the trees. Back inside, Tank was at the door, watching. Caleb slept soundly in the guest room. Josh sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. "We're running out of time," he whispered. "Then we move faster. We don't back down." Because no matter how dark the woods got, Tank had already chosen. Caleb wasn't alone anymore. And neither was Josh. The morning after the man appeared at the fence, a heavy silence settled over the house. Snow clung to the branches outside, and the clouds hung low and dense, like they were pressing down on everything. Caleb played quietly on the rug, stacking blocks and humming to himself, while Tank lay close by, alert even in rest. Josh sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring out the window with a look I couldn't quite read, somewhere between fear and steel. I joined him, holding my own mug between cold fingers. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just listened to the quiet tick of the wall clock and Caleb's soft voice narrating his play. Eventually, Josh said, "He won't stop." I know. I used to think if I just stayed out of sight, out of mind, he'd give up, that maybe I didn't matter enough to chase. I shook my head. "You matter because you didn't run away from being a dad. Not really. You ran with him, not from him." Josh looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know how to win this." "You don't have to win. You just have to show the truth." Later that morning, Jim Parker called. He'd filed an emergency motion with the family court in town. He'd also connected with a social worker who specialized in transitional custody cases, someone with a reputation for seeing past appearances. The court hearing would be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like both a lifeline and a countdown. Josh took the news with a quiet nod. He didn't smile. He didn't collapse in relief. He just exhaled long and slow and said, "Thank you." For the rest of the day, We focused on small things: cleaning, cooking, reading books with Caleb. Josh helped me fix a broken hinge on the tool shed, and for a while we worked in companionable silence, passing tools back and forth like we'd done it for years. That evening, after Caleb was asleep, and the fire had burned down to glowing coals, we sat on the couch and reviewed everything again with Jim over speakerphone. Custody records, proof of care, medical visits, pictures, videos, journal entries. Josh had documented more than he realized, and Jim was hopeful. "I won't lie," Jim said, his voice crackling over the line. "This grandfather has reach. He'll try to use it. But what you have is something courts are starting to take seriously. Emotional continuity. Caleb knows you, trusts you. That counts." After the call ended, Josh stayed up a while longer, staring into the fire. I left him there and headed to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Something about the night felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Just past 2 a.m., Tank barked once, a deep, echoing sound that made my heart jolt. I threw on my coat and ran to the living room. Josh was already standing at the window. Tank sat at the door, body rigid. Outside, just beyond the tree line, a car sat idling. Its headlights were off. No movement. No sound but the low rumble of the engine. We didn't move. Then the car slowly backed out and disappeared into the trees. Tank let out a low growl, but didn't bark again. "They're watching," Josh whispered. "Me, him, you. They won't do anything with a court date pending." Josh looked at me like I hadn't understood. "That won't stop him. He plays outside the rules." The next morning, I called Jim and told him about the car. He promised to alert the authorities and file for a protective notice. Meanwhile, I added 2 more trail cams, one at the back of the property, one hidden in the woods. I didn't tell Caleb why. He just thought we were playing spy, and that made him laugh. Tank followed me everywhere now, even when I went out to bring in wood. His behavior had shifted. He was more alert, more serious. He didn't relax unless Caleb was in his line of sight. 3 days before the hearing, Jim arrived at the house with a woman named Sandra. She was the social worker he'd mentioned. Late 50s, gray coat, kind but sharp eyes. She knelt down immediately to greet Caleb and scratched behind Tank's ears like she'd known him forever. We sat down together and talked for nearly 2 hours. Josh answered everything honestly. He didn't try to justify the hiding or paint himself as perfect. He just told the truth. What he'd feared, why he ran, how he tried to build a safe life with what he had. Sandra asked to observe the daily routine, so she stayed for lunch. She watched as Caleb helped me stir a pot of soup, as Josh bundled him up before taking him outside for a walk with Tank, and as the boy curled up beside the dog during nap time. Before she left, she turned to me quietly. "That boy is bonded, deeply, to both of them. And that dog, well, he's like a third guardian." I smiled. He's got a good sense for people. "I'll submit my report tonight. If the judge reads it before the hearing, it'll help." That night, we felt a little lighter. Not safe, not yet, but steadier. 2 nights before the hearing, it happened again. A thump outside. Then a shattering crash. I jumped up and raced outside with a flashlight. The back window of my truck had been smashed. Glass glittered across the snow like diamonds. On the seat inside, someone had spray-painted a single word: thief. Josh came out behind me, eyes wide. Tank stood at the edge of the porch, teeth bared, muscles stiff. "They're trying to rattle us," I said. "It's the last gasp before the hearing. Don't let it shake you." But it did. It shook us both. I filed a report the next morning. Sheriff Donnelly came out himself to take photos. He didn't say much, but I could tell he didn't like where this was heading. The night before the court date, I packed a bag for Caleb. Snacks, toys, his drawing of Tank. We agreed that I would bring them in while Josh stayed back unless needed. Jim said it was better to present everything calmly first, without risking confrontation in the courtroom. We didn't sleep much. Tank paced the hallway half the night. In the early morning dark, Josh knelt beside Caleb's bed and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he hugged him tight, kissed his forehead, and watched as I buckled him into the truck. Tank jumped into the back seat without a sound, settling beside Caleb like a sentry. As we drove toward town, I checked the rearview mirror more than once. No cars followed, but I could feel the weight of everything pressing down. We were walking into the fire. But we weren't walking in alone. The courthouse in Brattleboro wasn't large. A pale gray building with narrow windows and wide steps that echoed with every footfall. I parked in the side lot next to Jim's car and looked back to see Caleb still asleep in the back seat, his small hand resting on Tank's neck. Tank didn't move. He just sat like a statue, his eyes calm, his body alert. I didn't wake Caleb right away. Jim came over, and we stood by the truck while the morning fog drifted low over the parking lot. "The judge is fair," Jim said, adjusting his coat. "He's seen plenty of messy custody battles, but he's also a stickler for stability. That's our strongest point. And the grandfather? He'll be there, probably with his lawyer, maybe two." I nodded slowly and glanced back at the truck again. Tank shifted slightly, lifting his head toward the building. "We won't let them take him without a fight," I said. Jim didn't answer that. He just gave me a look that said he understood exactly what we were walking into. I opened the door gently, and Caleb blinked awake. "Are we there yet?" "Almost, buddy. You ready to go inside with Tank?" He yawned and nodded, wrapping his arms around Tank's neck. The dog waited until Caleb had climbed out, then followed without being told. I clipped on his leash just for show, but he didn't need it. Inside the courthouse, we passed through security. The guards didn't say anything about the dog. One of them even leaned down to pat Tank and whispered, "Good boy," before waving us through. We were shown into a small waiting room just off the courtroom. The walls were painted a tired beige, and the chairs were bolted to the floor. Caleb sat on my lap with a juice box while Jim reviewed some papers on the bench across from us. Tank sat between us, eyes on the door. Then the door opened. The grandfather walked in with 2 lawyers in tow. He looked exactly as I remembered from the fence. Tall, polished, cold. His coat was perfectly pressed. His shoes shined, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at Caleb, didn't acknowledge him at all. But he did look at Tank. And something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance? Disgust? It was gone in a second. "Mr. Elliott," one of the lawyers said to me, offering a tight smile. "We hope this process goes smoothly." "Smoothly would be nice," I replied. They took their seats and waited. Eventually, a clerk ushered us into the courtroom. The judge sat behind a wide oak bench, reading something from a folder. When he looked up, he raised his eyebrows slightly at the sight of Tank, but said nothing. Caleb sat beside me, holding onto Tank's collar with one hand and the toy truck I'd brought with the other. The hearing began. It started with formalities, introductions, affidavits, acknowledgement of emergency filing. Jim spoke clearly, professionally, outlining the timeline, the care Josh had provided, the stability of our home, the documented bond between Caleb and Tank. Then the grandfather's team spoke. They were smooth, polished. They painted Josh as irresponsible, unstable, unfit. They pointed out the lack of permanent residence, the flight from legal process, the refusal to engage with the family. Caleb didn't understand any of it, but he leaned a little closer to Tank whenever the voices rose. Then Sandra, the social worker, stood and gave her report. She spoke slowly but firmly. This child has found emotional stability in his current environment. He displays signs of safety, security, and affection toward both his father and the household guardian animal. The environment is quiet, supportive, and free from neglect. The grandfather's lawyer objected to the characterization of Josh as a guardian. Sandra simply said, "Labels don't matter to a toddler, consistency does." After she sat down, the judge folded his hands and looked over the room. "Mr. Elliott," he said, "you're not a blood relative. What is your role in this?" I stood. "I've been a neighbor. A friend. I opened my home when Josh and Caleb had nowhere else to go. And I've watched the bond between this boy and my dog grow into something remarkable. I'm not here for myself. I'm here because Caleb deserves safety. And he found it." The judge nodded, then looked to the grandfather. "Would you like to speak?" The man stood slowly. "My grandson belongs with family, not hidden in the woods with a fugitive. I've waited patiently for this to be corrected." His voice was calm, calculated, but it didn't reach his eyes. The judge leaned back, silent for a long time. Then he said, "I'd like to speak to the child, informally, just for a few minutes." Caleb looked up when his name was called. I gave him a gentle nudge, and Tank rose beside him. "Just you and the boy, Your Honor?" Jim asked. The judge hesitated. "Let the dog stay." They went into chambers. The rest of us sat in frozen silence. The grandfather looked irritated, but said nothing. 15 minutes later, the door opened again. The judge returned, Caleb in one hand, Tank walking calmly beside them. Caleb had a crayon drawing clutched in his fist. The judge placed him back in his seat gently. No one said a word. Then the judge addressed the room. "It's clear this case is not about neglect or harm. It is about fear and about trust. The boy is bonded deeply with his current caregiver and environment. While the biological relation of the petitioner is acknowledged, it is not superior to the best interests of the child." The grandfather's lawyers stood. "Your Honor, we request denied. Temporary guardianship will remain with the current custodian until a full custody hearing is scheduled. Child may not be removed from current residence without court approval." A gavel dropped. It wasn't over, but we'd won the first step. Caleb grinned as he clutched Tank's ear on the way out. He said, "I draw really good," he whispered. "You do, buddy," I said. "You really do." Outside the courthouse, snow had started falling again. Thick, silent flakes settling on Caleb's shoulders as he walked hand in hand with me, Tank trotting beside us like the world hadn't changed. But it had. And though the road ahead would still be hard, we had momentum now. We had each other. And we had a dog who never gave up on the boy who brought him a rattle. The first few days after the hearing felt almost unreal. We returned home to the cabin, snow falling steadily all the way, Tank sprawled across the back seat as Caleb leaned into him and quietly hummed. Josh was waiting at the window. When he saw us, he stepped outside before we'd even pulled up, coat half-zipped, boots untied, eyes never leaving Caleb's face. When I opened the door, Caleb jumped down and barreled into his father's arms. They didn't say anything. Josh just held him for a long time, his eyes closed. Tank stood beside them, tail wagging gently as if he too understood something important had just shifted. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than it had in days. We made soup, stacked firewood, and let Caleb nap with Tank on the rug like he always did. But beneath the comfort, there was a tension neither Josh nor I could quite shake. The court had ruled in our favor, for now, but there was no guarantee what the full custody hearing might bring. Jim called the next morning with more details. "We've bought time. That's what this was really about. Now we prepare." He outlined the next steps, gathering character references, setting up official home evaluations, getting Caleb enrolled in a local preschool program if we could swing it. "It shows stability," Jim said. "Shows roots. That'll matter. The judge liked what he saw. Let's make sure he sees more of it." We got to work. Josh and I cleaned out the old guest room and turned it into a proper bedroom for Caleb. It had been a storage room for years, cluttered with boxes and unused furniture, but we hauled everything out, painted the walls a soft green, found a bed frame at a local salvage shop and painted it white. Josh bought bright bedding with cartoon bears, and I built a small bookshelf from leftover pine planks in the shed. Tank supervised the entire process like a foreman. When Caleb saw it for the first time, he just stood in the doorway, mouth open. "You like it?" Josh asked. Caleb nodded slowly. "I have a room." "You have a home," I said. That night, for the first time, Caleb fell asleep in his own bed. Tank lay curled on the rug beside it, and Josh sat on the floor reading a picture book until the boy's breathing evened out. Then we sat in the kitchen with mugs of tea, neither of us saying much. "What happens if I lose him?" Josh asked after a long silence. "You won't. We're doing everything right. This house, this life, it's proof." He looked down at his mug. "I used to think the best thing I could do for him was keep moving, stay invisible. But now I want him to grow up knowing he belongs somewhere." He already does. We kept building that life piece by piece. Josh applied for part-time work at the hardware store in town. They remembered him from before and hired him the same day. I drove him in for his first shift while Tank stayed home with Caleb. Later that afternoon, I picked up a used snow sled from a neighbor, and we took Caleb down to the small slope near the edge of the woods. Tank ran alongside, barking joyfully as Caleb screamed with laughter. There were no new letters, no shadowy cars, no more footprints in the snow. Still, Tank watched the woods. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The snow began to thaw. Mud lined the edge of the trail behind the house. We started planning a garden for the spring, just a few raised beds, and maybe a chicken coop if we could find the time. Josh was good with tools, and Caleb had taken to following him everywhere with a tiny plastic hammer. One afternoon, as I was repairing a broken latch on the shed, Tank let out a single bark. I looked up. Josh was on the porch, hammer in hand. Caleb stood behind him, clutching his father's leg. At the edge of the woods was a woman. She stood just beyond the trees, her coat thin, hair tied back, eyes rimmed in red. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Josh took a slow step forward. "Maggie?" The woman flinched. I stepped forward too, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. Tank didn't growl, but he stood between her and Caleb. Josh called out again, softer. "Maggie, it's okay." She took one step closer, then another. "I didn't come to take him," she said, voice hoarse. "I just wanted to see." Caleb peeked around Josh's leg. "Mom?" The word hung in the air like fog. Josh went stiff. I could see it in his jaw, his shoulders, the way his eyes darted to Caleb, then to her. "Why now?" he asked. "I didn't know how to come back," she said. "I was scared. I thought you'd hate me." "I did," he said. "But that doesn't matter now," she nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Can I just say hello?" Josh looked at Caleb, then down at Tank, then back at me. "I'll go with you," I said. We walked to the edge of the woods together. Caleb held tight to his dad's hand. Tank stayed close, eyes on the woman. Maggie knelt down. "Hi, sweetheart. I've missed you." Caleb didn't move right away. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her neck. Josh looked like someone had just knocked the air out of him. They stayed like that for a while. No one spoke. No one moved. Eventually, Maggie stood. "I'm not here to stay. I know I don't get to just walk back in. I just needed to see that he was okay." "He's more than okay," Josh said. "He's got a room. He's got friends. He's got a dog who'd walk through fire for him." She smiled faintly. "He always loved dogs. He still does." She looked at me then. "Thank you for taking care of both of them." I gave a small nod. "You gave him life. Josh gave him love. I just gave them a roof." Maggie started to turn away, but paused. "Tell him, if he ever wants to talk, I'll be in town, at the motel on Route 9, just for a few days." Josh didn't respond. We watched her go. Caleb stood quietly for a moment, then looked up. "She smells like apples." Josh laughed. It was sharp and sudden and honest. "Yeah, buddy, she always did." That night, Tank curled up at the foot of Caleb's bed and didn't move until morning. We didn't talk much about the visit. Josh was quiet for a few days. He went to work, helped around the house, told Caleb bedtime stories every night. But he was turning something over in his mind, I could tell. One evening he said, "I think I might talk to her." I nodded. "That's your call." "Not for Caleb. For me. I need to know why." The next day, he drove into town alone. Tank waited by the door until he came back. He didn't say what they talked about, but his shoulders were looser, his eyes clearer. "She's not coming back," he said that night. "But she doesn't want to take him either. That's something." It was. Spring crept in slowly after that. Buds appeared on the trees. The garden beds began to thaw. Caleb started helping me plant seeds, his small fingers pushing them into the soil with surprising care. Tank kept watch from a sunny patch nearby. Each day felt like we were building something, not just a case, not just a defense, but a real life. And though we still didn't know what the final hearing would bring, there was no mistaking this truth. Something had shifted. Not just in the court, not just in the house, but in all of us, even Tank. Because he no longer watched the woods with suspicion. He watched them with peace. By the time April came around, the last of the snow had melted from the trail behind the house. The muddy path that once felt cold and foreboding had become familiar, even welcoming. Tiny green shoots poked through the forest floor. The stream, which had been frozen just weeks earlier, now trickled with fresh spring water. Caleb called it the whisper water, and every afternoon after his nap, we made our way to the bend where the sound echoed most. Tank always led the way, his pace slow and sure. Caleb liked to walk just behind him, one hand resting lightly on the golden fur of his back like Tank was his guide through a land only they understood. Back at the cabin, things settled into an easy rhythm. Josh's shifts at the hardware store had increased, and the manager had started talking about full-time work if Josh wanted it. The extra hours meant more income, but they also brought more structure, something Jim kept insisting would work in Josh's favor at the custody hearing. Sandra, the social worker, made another visit. She stayed longer this time, watching as Caleb helped me water the new seedlings we'd planted in the garden beds. She took notes as Josh read a story aloud on the porch swing while Tank lay at his feet. Before she left, she crouched beside Caleb and asked him what he liked most about living here. He thought for a moment, then said, "Doggy waits for me to wake up." Sandra smiled. "That's a good friend." "He doesn't bark at my dreams," Caleb said. "He just stays." When she drove away that afternoon, Josh stood watching the road until her car disappeared around the bend. "She asked me if I was ready to be a permanent guardian," he said. "What did you tell her?" He looked at me. "That I've never been more ready for anything." 2 weeks later, we got the date for the final custody hearing. 6 weeks out. Jim called that night and told us it was time to step things up. "This next part is about character," he said. "Letters from neighbors, family, co-workers. Anyone who can speak to your parenting, your commitment, your life here." Josh sighed. "Family's a short list. You already met her." He meant Maggie. She'd left town 2 days after their talk. No forwarding address, no goodbyes. Just a quiet, handwritten note she'd left with the motel clerk for Josh that simply said, "Thank you for keeping him safe." "She might not be around," I said, "but you've got people who matter. You've got the folks at work, the clerk at the feed store who always slips Caleb an extra lollipop, even the guy who sold us that beat-up bookshelf. They've seen you here. That's what counts." Josh nodded slowly. "I'll start asking." Over the next few weeks, people stepped up more than I expected. The hardware store manager wrote a 2-page letter describing Josh's punctuality, work ethic, and how Caleb waited patiently in the corner office on snow days with Tank curled up beside him. The town librarian sent one too, saying she'd never seen a toddler more respectful of books or a father more engaged in every page. Even the mail carrier dropped off a note, saying how Caleb always waved and offered Tank a stick through the fence. Jim gathered it all. Built a binder. Said we were building a foundation the court couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Josh and I kept living the life we were building. Caleb started drawing more. Pictures of the garden, of the house, of the 3 of us with Tank in the middle, like a lion guarding his den. He stuck them on the fridge with magnets and named each one aloud like they were exhibits in a gallery. One afternoon, I caught him whispering to Tank while they sat by the window. "What's he saying?" I asked. Josh smiled. "He's telling him about the judge." "Does Tank get a say?" "He already made his decision." That night, I sat outside after dark, listening to the peepers sing from the woods. Tank lay at my feet, his breathing steady, eyes glowing faintly in the porch light. "You did all this, you know," I said softly. He didn't move, just let out a slow breath and kept watching the trees. 3 weeks before the hearing, we got another letter. This one came by certified mail. The envelope was stiff, the return address listed as a firm from Boston. Inside was a statement from the grandfather's legal team requesting an in-home evaluation of their own. "It's a pressure tactic," Jim said when I called him. "They want to rattle you. Try to find any cracks. You don't have any." We agreed to it. The evaluator showed up 2 days later. Brisk, polite, all business. She asked pointed questions, inspected the house, asked to see where Caleb slept, what he ate, what books he read. Tank followed her the whole time. Never barked. Never left her side. At one point, Caleb reached out and handed her a drawing. It was of the cabin, the garden, and Tank sitting by the door. She looked at it, blinked, and said, "Thank you." That evening, we didn't talk much. Josh was tired, the way people get when they've had to hold their breath for too long. "I just want it to be over," he said. "One way or the other. It'll end, and when it does, we'll still be here." I keep thinking about that first night, when Tank found us. I nodded. So do I. Josh looked out the window toward the trees. "Do you think it meant something?" I think it meant everything. The last week before the hearing arrived like the turn of a season. Everything was ready. Letters printed, documents filed, evaluations reviewed. The garden had begun to bloom, small green shoots standing proudly in the dirt. Caleb spent most mornings out there with a plastic watering can and Tank beside him, keeping watch like always. One morning, as we sat on the porch sipping coffee, Josh said, "Win or lose, thank you." I didn't say anything. I just reached down and scratched behind Tank's ear. He leaned into it like he always did. A few days later, we packed Caleb's bag for the trip into town. A change of clothes, a few favorite toys, the picture he drew for the judge. Tank sat near the truck while we loaded up. Josh looked down at him. "You ready, boy?" Tank stood and wagged his tail once. Caleb climbed into the back seat and patted the space beside him. Tank hopped up without hesitation. Josh turned to me. "Let's bring him home for good." And we pulled out of the driveway, the trees parting in the rearview mirror like curtains opening on the last act of a play we hadn't meant to start, but couldn't imagine ending any other way. We arrived at the courthouse just after 8 in the morning. The sun was barely up, casting a soft golden hue over the steps. Caleb held tight to Josh's hand, clutching a stuffed bear in his other. Tank walked beside them, leash loose but unnecessary, calm as ever. Jim met us near the front entrance, his briefcase in one hand and a travel mug in the other. "You ready?" he asked, looking at Josh. Josh nodded. "As I'll ever be." We passed through security. The guards gave Tank a glance, but one recognized him from the previous visit and waved us through with a smile. "Good to see you again, big guy," he murmured. Tank gave a gentle wag. The courtroom was the same, though the mood this time was heavier. We took our seats on the left side, the familiar weight of the room settling over our shoulders. The grandfather was already there with his attorneys, his face as cold and unreadable as before. He didn't look at Caleb. He didn't look at Josh. His gaze stayed fixed on the bench, as if this were a transaction, not a hearing. The judge entered and called the room to order. Jim began. He laid everything out clearly: Josh's efforts to build a life, the stability of our home, the consistent care of Caleb, the community support, the detailed observations from Sandra, and the court-appointed evaluator. He spoke calmly, confidently, drawing from every truth we had stacked up over the last few months. Then the grandfather's team took their turn. They pointed out the instability of the past, the months on the run, the lack of legal custody. They referenced bank statements, employment gaps, and questioned whether Josh could offer Caleb a future that matched the wealth and privilege his grandfather could provide. When Josh took the stand, he didn't falter. He told the truth, not the polished, practiced kind, but the kind that lived in scars and quiet nights and early mornings spent fixing what you could with what you had. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't know if I could keep him, but I knew I had to try. Because no one else was going to hold him when he cried. No one else was going to teach him how to say please and thank you. No one else was going to stay awake all night with him when he had a fever. That was me. That's still me." The judge listened closely, his expression unreadable. Then Jim asked for permission to bring in Tank. "Permission granted," the judge said with a curious glance. Tank was led to the front of the courtroom where Caleb stood waiting. The moment the leash dropped, Caleb knelt down and threw his arms around the dog's neck. Jim addressed the court. "This dog is not evidence. He's not a pet. He's family. From the moment Caleb stepped onto Will's property, it was Tank who found him. It was Tank who brought him back. It was Tank who stood between this child and the cold woods night after night. Sometimes a dog can see what we miss, and Tank has never once left Caleb's side." The courtroom was silent. Then the judge stood. "This decision was not easy," he began. "Custody cases rarely are, but my responsibility is to determine not only who has the legal right to a child, but who offers the greatest chance at a loving, stable, and secure life." He paused, scanning the room. "Biology matters, but love matters more. Safety, trust, continuity, all of that matters more. I've read every report, I've listened to every witness, and I've watched this child with his father." He looked down at Caleb, who still sat with Tank curled around him like a warm blanket. "I am awarding full legal custody to Joshua Nolan, with the understanding that this court may revisit the case if material circumstances change. The grandfather may petition for supervised visitation under the conditions outlined in the final report. This case is now closed." The gavel fell. Josh exhaled for the first time in hours. His hands shook as he reached for Caleb, who looked up at him with innocent eyes and asked, "Can we go home now?" Jim clapped Josh on the shoulder. "You did it." "We did it," Josh replied, his voice breaking. We walked out of the courthouse into a sky bright with early spring. The clouds had broken open, casting warm light on the steps. Josh held Caleb in one arm, and Tank walked proudly at his side. We didn't talk much on the ride back. Caleb dozed off in the back seat, the bear still tucked under one arm, Tank's head resting in his lap. At the cabin, we opened the front door to a house that felt different now. Not a shelter, not a hiding place, but a home. A real one. Josh carried Caleb inside and laid him on the couch. Tank curled up beside him without being told. I stoked the fire, then stepped outside to split some wood, letting the air fill my lungs. A week later, we threw a small party. Just a few neighbors, some co-workers from the hardware store, Jim, and Sandra. Caleb wore a paper crown someone had brought from the party store and ran around the yard with a plastic sword shouting, "I'm the king!" while Tank barked along like a loyal knight. I grilled burgers. Josh made lemonade. Someone brought pie. Sandra watched it all quietly before turning to me. "You know," she said, "this isn't the ending most kids like him get." I looked at her. "It's not the ending, it's the beginning." She smiled and nodded. "You're right." The sun dipped lower over the trees, bathing everything in gold. Caleb climbed onto Tank's back like a tiny rider, and the dog trotted around the yard with him until they both collapsed laughing into the grass. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were done, Josh and I sat on the porch with mugs of tea. Caleb was asleep in his room, his drawings now covering nearly the entire fridge. Tank lay on the porch steps, nose in his paws. You think he knows? Josh asked. That he started all this? I looked at the old dog, his fur graying around the muzzle, his eyes half-lidded, but still watching everything. Yeah, I said. I think he knew from the very first moment. We sat in the quiet, the stars rising above the trees, and the wind soft through the leaves. There were no more footsteps at the edge of the woods. No more letters, no more waiting, just the sound of a boy breathing steady in his bed, and the dog who never stopped protecting him. Home wasn't just a place, it was the choice to stay. And thanks to a rattle, a trail, and an old dog with more wisdom than most people I've ever known, that choice had been made, and it had changed everything.